Thank you to Valerie, Tanya, and Melissa for bringing me here. I'm delighted to be here. I want to warn you that I have a bad cold, so if I break into a coughing fit in the middle, you'll have to forgive me. Yeah, great. As Valerie noted, I've written a number of books on the history of color. Starting in 2012, I wrote a book called The Color Revolution, and most recently in 2017 and 2018, I published 2 more books on the history of color. My work focuses on the little understood B2B business to business action of color prediction and color forecasting. So when we think of forecasting, we think of our friendly weatherman. But I'm going to tell you a different story. When we think of color prediction in the fashion business, we often think of this famous scene, which we've seen this morning, from Funny Face, and of course the cerulean blue scene from The Devil Wears Prada, which is so commonplace now that everyone knows it. And I'm going to tell a very different story, and my story goes back to the 19th century, to this scene in 1856. This is William Henry Perkin. Obviously, this is not 1856 painting. This is a 1980s painting from the Chemical Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia. But it depicts a scene from 1856. William Henry Perkin, in the middle, a teenage chemist at the Imperial College London, was given a homework assignment by his professor, a famous organic chemist named Hoffman. And his assignment was to produce quinine for the use in fighting malaria in the British colonies. He didn't succeed in doing that. He didn't succeed in synthesizing quinine, but he spilled his beaker. And when he spilled his beaker, his rag stained purple. And it stained this particular distinctive color called mauve. Mauve was all the rage amongst the ladies in Paris and the ladies in London, but it was very, very hard to obtain large quantities of it. And Perkin discovered a way to make large quantities of this mauve color and then launched basically the synthetic organic chemicals industry. Now, I love this portrait because it's just, it's really a wonderful pop culture image, but it shows Perkin in the middle, flanked by the capitalist on one hand and the practical man on the other hand. So it gives you a well-rounded view. Now, Perkin was a young entrepreneur. He dropped out of college, dropped out of university, and got together with his uncle and some other investors and his father, and they created a works in North London to make the first aniline dyes, and basically launched the modern aniline dye revolution that's with us today. The Germans soon stole the mantle from the English in terms of making synthetic dyes, and came to world domination in dye manufacture by the 1870s. The Germans, by the 1870s, were exporting dyes all around the world. They were able to make color-fast, reliable, synthetic dyes in virtually any color of the rainbow. And what you end up with is illustrations like this from a 1870 Butterick pattern advertisement showing the ladies promenading through the park in virtually every possible color. And pink, is, as you can see, is in the foreground. But I also want to point to the fact that if you look really closely, many of the gloves that the ladies are wearing are also hot pink. Can you hold that thought? Now, when you have the ability to make any color in the world in great variety, how do you learn to control this? Well, what I'm going to give you insight in today is really a kind of a whirlwind tour of the history of color and trend prediction and how the color pink fits into that. So it's a little different. It's a much more quotidian approach. We've been up high on the mountain looking at haute couture, and we're going to dig a little deeper here into the deep recesses of the fashion system to see how the fashion system works internally. So let's go back to 1870 to 1914. Those of you who are museum curators are familiar with these types of artifacts. These are shade cards. And museum collections of textiles are full of great big stacks of these shade cards, which are basically great big books when you open up. And inside them are these silk threads showing different rainbow colors. These were shade cards were introduced by the French dye stuffs industry in the 19th century, and they were used as business-to-business tools to market their services. So a dye, so the way the textile industry works is you've got weavers, you've got dye houses, you've got finishers, and so a dye house would do business with a spinning mill or a weaving mill, and they would say, "We've been to Paris. We've been to Paris, and these are the colors that we see all the fashionable ladies in Paris or Vienna or Zurich wearing, and we can dye your ribbons or your silk broadcloths this color." And these are the color patterns that we suggest. So you can see pink here is juxtaposed against kind of a blue. We've got blue and pink here from this 1870s card. You've got to put yourself back into the 1870s, and you've got to remember that this is, again, we're not talking about haute couture, we're talking about everyday fashion. This is a period where accessories were important fashion. So most women, ready-to-wear was still not developed. Most women would go to a local dressmaker or a local tailor, and they would spiff up their outfits every year by getting new millinery or augmenting their millinery with new ribbons and new bows and new bibelots. And color was an important part of that. So what ends up happening is specialized businesses, such as J. Claude Frères, who you see here, which is a business in Paris, evolves to basically work with the couture, examine the couture colors, interpret them for the mass market, create these new shade cards, and sell the shade cards around the world. So lady got up earlier and she said she was a milliner. So if she had been a milliner in 1890, she would have wanted one of these shade cards from Paris, which would tell her all the latest colors so that she could then stock her shop appropriately with all the right colors. And as you can see, pink is part of a package. It's not standing alone, it's part of a package. So up here at the top, you've got the full shade card opened, and on the bottom, you've got a close-up of the shade card from 1895 with all the different pinks mixed in with the different colors. So pink isn't really a standalone color in these business-to-business tools. Now, American women, despite all of this effort to control the color palette, American women had a reputation for having a preference for punchy colors. And you see lots of, if you look at Reed Harper's Bazaar, or some Youth's Companion and some of the other Life magazine from the 19th century, you see comments about the gaudy tastes of women, of American women. So how does this begin to change? Well, we have to look forward to 1914 and to World War I, and we need to move here to New York. So next part of my talk, the middle part of my talk, is going to focus on New York in the period 1914 to 1965, where by 1923, 80% of all U.S. apparel was made here in New York, and 7th Avenue was just opening up and just starting to be built as the main fashion center. So the question that you have if you're in the garment district, if you're a textile mill, if you're a ribbon manufacturer, if you're a handbag manufacturer here on 7th Avenue, the question that you have is, in the 1920s, how do you get info on Paris trends, and how do you use the Paris info in the US market? So you can look at Paris trends, but you've got to be able to interpret them to suit the American market. You've also got the problem of American taste. Americans by the 1920s, are a multicultural society. Not everybody is able to step through the portal of consumer society. There are many people who are left behind. Recent immigrants, African Americans, poor people are not able to participate. But in the 1920s, we've got really the first flowering of consumer society. And ready-to-wear plays an important role in that. Automobiles play an important role in that. And in this cover from Motor Magazine from 1927, we see Mrs. Consumer, dressed in her fuchsia/pink outfit, selecting the car colors to match her outfit. Now, most people don't realize it, but cars were actually painted in really bright colors in the 1920s. And they were painted in these polychrome paint jobs. So it's not surprising that Motor Magazine has this kind of image on the front. Now, you've got the problem of taste. You've got the problem of how to control so many colors. And here comes my hero, my heroine, Margaret Hayden Rourke, America's first color forecaster. Margaret Hayden Rourke was managing director of the Textile Color Card Association between 1919 and 1924. This organization is still in existence today as a color association of the United States, but it is today it is one of many forecasting organizations in the world. At this point in time, it was really the only color forecasting organization in the world. Margaret Hayden Rourke was as I say, America's first color forecaster. And what did she do? Basically, she ran a trade association called the Color Association, and it was a trade association for businesses. Businesses in the garment industry, in the textile industry, in the leather industry, in the thread industry could belong to this association, and they would get information. They would get Margaret Hayden Rourke's predictions on what the latest colors were going to be. They would also get information from her on seasonal color changes and fads, her predictions on fads. So how did she operate? She was based here in New York, and she had a series of color scouts in Paris, and the records between her and her color scouts actually survive in a library called the Hagley Library in Delaware. And you can actually look at how Rourke communicated with her color scouts. So here's Rourke, and this is Bettina Bedwell, a fashion columnist for the Chicago Herald Tribune, who was her color scout in Paris. And below you see these color cards. You can see the pinks playing in there as part of a palette. So how did Margaret Hayden Rourke get information from Paris, and what did she do with it? And how does pink figure into the story? Well, she got information from Paris from her color scouts on a regular basis, on a daily basis. Remember, this is the pre-internet era. And so, when you think about it, it was actually pretty remarkable what they were doing. They had transatlantic cables, and there was an elaborate system that was developed for her color scouts, who she paid, in Paris, who had entree to the couture houses, because they had passes. They were journalists or they were commissionaires, so they could get into the couture houses. They would go to the shows, they would go to the shops, they would study the scene, and they would cable her information about color. A few days later, she would receive a letter from her scouts with a sketch, such as the one that you see here, showing how the different colors were in use in the different couture houses. They also sent her little bits and bobs like this tiny little swatches, which really, when you look at, really mean nothing. But when you have these color forecasters had libraries of these kinds of things, documenting the incoming colors from the different couture houses. And they would use this as visual material as they designed color forecasts. Now, what did Margaret Hayden Rourke do, and why is she so important? Well, she really developed the color forecasting system that's in use today. And so she came up with a system whereby you have basic colors that are standards that change every 7 to 15 years. You've got seasonal colors that change every season, and you've got trendy colors that change every minute. Okay? So now just put yourself back now. This is 7th Avenue. It's 1925. You're running a garment manufactory, and you want to know, you're designing a pink coat, and you need to know, you need to communicate to your textile manufacturer what color pink thread you need. And so you use this tool to communicate by cable or by phone to your thread manufacturer saying, I want TCCA pink 39, so that you get the right color pink. Okay? Now this seems trivial, but when you're running a business, it's very important to have these kinds of tools at your disposal. So she developed this system where these are the basic colors, and these are going to be in style for about 15 years, and they're not going to change. And then you've got seasonal colors that change from season to season. You've got fall, winter, spring, summer, and here you see the pinks, again, integrated into the system, paired with purples or blues or juxtaposed with yellows and so on and so forth to suggest fashionable pairings to milliners or garment manufacturers or shoe manufacturers, okay? And then you've got final thing that she does is she comes up with trendy colors, such as you see here, Millinery Fashion Show 1954. So periodically, we'll see a color pop up. I was interviewed earlier this year by a journalist from The Guardian, Manchester Guardian, who wanted to know why yellow all of a sudden was popular. And these colors just pop up suddenly. Mainly, they pop up because of an event, an exhibition, a celebrity, and they kind of take off for a bit, and then they fizz out. So in 1953, Mamie Eisenhower wore her famous pink gown designed by Nettie Rosenstein, and a few years later, the milliners, who were fast going out of business because hats were going out of fashion, called on Mrs. Rourke, called on the TCCA, called on Estelle Tennis, Mrs. Rourke's assistant, and said, help, we need help. Help us design a sexy hat color that will sell. We need help. And they came up with a palette pink as the hat color of the year. Now, Rourke was really responsible for helping the American woman to get that reputation, that post-war reputation that she had for being the best-dressed women in the world. She was really responsible for an idea that she didn't invent, but she Americanized. She Americanized the idea of the ensemble. So when my mother went out in 1960, she would not go out without hat, gloves, bag, purse, and shoes that matched. Okay? And this was an easy way for women to update their wardrobes, was to update their accessories, to match their accessories. Margaret Hayden Rourke was the big promoter of that concept. And I was just reading Christian Dior's biography in which he comments on how well together the American women of the post-war years, how well put together they were, and how important color was to their ensemble. So I think we can see Rourke's influence. Now, how do we get from Margaret Hayden Rourke and 7th Avenue to today? Well, as a historian, I'm always uncomfortable talking about today, but I'll do my best. And let me just go forward, beginning in the 1960s. In the post-war years, things began to change because you have a more isolationist culture right after the war here in the United States, and you've got the rise of synthetic fibers and rayon fibers like you see here. You also have a new fashion center coming up, and that fashion center is in London. So Carnaby Street and other sections of London become the new hotspots for youth fashion. And out of this comes, out of the cauldron of London, comes a new type of forecaster, and that is the trend forecaster. So Margaret Hayden Rourke was a color forecaster. And out of London in the swinging 60s comes trend forecasting. So here you have a picture of David Wolf and Lee Rudd, who ran a company called IM International. They were both Americans living in London, and they really developed this whole system for really scoping out the culture like sophisticated anthropologists and trying to anticipate changing styles. And that's really more of what trend forecasters do today. Another important aspect today is, of course, the role of trade fairs like Premier Vision, which put together exhibits on their notions of how the colors are going to be. Finally, you have subscription services such as Pantone and WGSN, and since we're here on 7th Avenue, Doniger Creative Services is worth a mention. So here we have a La Vie en Rose palette put together by Doniger Creative Services in 2010, taking the cue from the culture. You may remember back around 2010, there was the Edith Piaf biography, right? And the movie on Edith Piaf, La Vie en Rose. So here, David Wolf, who's now with Doniger, has drawn on popular culture and put together an ensemble of pinks that would be used in this mood board that could be used to put together a collection of interior furniture or a collection of accessories, a collection of garments. The pink, it's important to say that this La Vie en Rose is just one of several palettes that are being suggested in spring-summer 2010. Now, all of this goes back to the American woman and her penchant for bright colors, and to Margaret Hayden Rourke and her color scouts in Paris, which end up resulting in American women having better taste in color, at least in the modern era. Thank you very much.